Everybody knows the legend. General Patton, the iron fist of the Third Army, solved problems with tanks, speed, and overwhelming force. But in the spring of 1945, Patton ran into a German defense that armor couldn't break. Not a fortified bunker complex, not a desperate panzer counterattack. It was the city of Kronberg, transformed into a precise, systematic death trap by a career Wehrmacht officer. A direct assault would have consumed a week and hundreds of American lives. Patton cleared it in 36 hours. 0 casualties. And he didn't use artillery to do it. He used a 20-minute dictation that shattered every convention of warfare. The formations capable of challenging the Third Army in a stand-up fight had already been destroyed, captured, or shoved back to defensive lines deeper east. What remained in the German cities and towns along Patton's path was a volatile patchwork. SS units with orders to die in place. Volkssturmmilitia, old men and teenage boys pressed into service with rifles they barely knew how to hold. And scattered Wehrmacht officers caught in an impossible tension, serving a regime that had obviously lost while trying to preserve enough personal honor to live with themselves when it was over. Kronberg occupied a strategic crossroads in central Germany whose importance to Patton's advance far exceeded the city's size or symbolic weight. The roads threading through it fed a network of routes critical to his next operational phase. Speed through Kronberg meant preserving the momentum that defined the Third Army. Delay at Kronberg meant gifting the Germans further east precious hours to harden resistance that would be paid for in American blood. The man responsible for Kronberg's defense was Colonel Werner Alderman, a career officer. He'd served in the Wehrmacht since before the war, fought in Poland, France, the Eastern Front. He'd accumulated the kind of combat record the German military honored with decorations, promotions, and professional respect. That respect was the only currency still worth anything in an army hemorrhaging everything else. Alderman was no fanatic. He was no ideologue. He was a soldier given an order who intended to execute it. Because executing orders was what soldiers did. Because he'd spent 3 decades constructing an identity around that single principle. The order was blunt. Hold Kronberg. Hold it at any cost. Deny it to the Americans as long as humanly possible. Alderman assessed the forces at his disposal against the forces bearing down on him and arrived at a cold conclusion. Conventional defense was out of the question. He lacked the men and the equipment to stop the Third Army in open battle. What he did have was time, engineers, and a city full of structures that could be converted from shelter into weapons. What Alderman's engineers did to Kronberg in the days before Patton's forces arrived was methodical, thorough, and deeply professional. Professional in the specific way German military engineering was always professional. Executed with precision, with painstaking attention to detail, and with absolute indifference to the civilians still living inside the city. They mined the main roads, they mined the bridges, they mined every building American soldiers would instinctively use for cover during an urban assault. The town hall, the hospital, the church, the school. Explosives wired to doors, windows, staircases, cellar entrances. Every square meter of Kronberg's urban terrain became a killing ground, engineered to annihilate any force that tried to push through the way forces normally pushed through cities. Then the German military personnel withdrew to defensive positions along the eastern edge and waited. Patton's lead elements reached Kronberg's outskirts on a Tuesday morning in late March. The initial reconnaissance flagged something strange. The city looked quiet. No visible German presence on the approaches, no artillery, no snipers. None of the resistance Patton's men had come to expect from a defended position. The streets were empty, The building stood untouched. From the outside, it resembled a city that had simply chosen surrender before the fight began. But the officer leading the forward elements sent back a report laced with unease. He couldn't name the problem precisely. The total absence of resistance in a city marked for defense felt wrong. Wrong in that particular way only soldiers with enough survivor behind them learned to recognize. He asked for authorization to halt, to push reconnaissance deeper before committing forces into the urban streets. Authorization came, and reconnaissance found the mines. Not everyone, not right away, but enough to make the picture unmistakable. Kronberg had been engineered into a killing ground on a scale Patton's engineers hadn't seen anywhere else in the campaign. The assessment that reached Third Army headquarters was blunt. Clearing Kronberg safely would consume days, possibly a full week. It would demand engineering assets heavy enough to stall the broader advance while they concentrated on a single city. Patton read that report at his desk. Then he went quiet for longer than anyone on his staff was accustomed to. When he spoke, he asked for the best available intelligence on the German commander responsible for Kronberg's defenses. The name Alderman came back, accompanied by a full service record. Patton studied it. Then he began dictating a message. Addressed to Colonel Werner Alderman, commanding German forces in and around Kronberg. Delivery required improvisation. Captured German radio frequencies paired with a local civilian willing to carry a written copy through the lines. Patton's staff had doubts about whether it would reach its target. Patton told them to send it regardless. The message opened with acknowledgement. It stated that General Patton was aware of the preparations made inside Kronberg, that he understood the military reasoning behind them, that he held professional respect for thorough defensive work and recognized the engineering as competent. Then it stated that none of it would alter the result. The Third Army was taking Kronberg no matter what had been laid in its streets. The only open question was what the city would look like when that was finished. And then the message said something Patton's staff had never heard from him, not in this precise form. It said that if Alderman's forces withdrew from Kronberg and delivered accurate maps of every mine placement within the city, Patton would guarantee treatment as prisoners of war under full Geneva Convention protections. That Alderman's cooperation would be documented in the official Third Army report in language that faithfully reflected what he had done. But if Alderman chose to hold position, if American soldiers died on mines buried beneath Kronberg streets, Patton stated he would personally direct every available Third Army asset against the German positions east of the city. Without the restraint he would normally extend to an enemy operating within accepted boundaries of warfare. The man killed on those mines would sit on Alderman's ledger, and Patton intended to settle that ledger completely. Then the message carried one final passage. It noted that Patton had reviewed Alderman's service record, that it belonged to a professional soldier who had fought honorably through difficult circumstances across many years. That professional soldiers who had served with honor deserved to finish their service with honor intact. And that the choice Alderman made in the next 12 hours would decide whether that remained possible. By any standard, it was an extraordinary piece of communication from a commanding general to an enemy officer. Patton's staff debated afterward whether it constituted a threat, an offer, or something that defied either label. The truthful answer was all three at once, which captured precisely how Patton functioned at his sharpest. He had handed Alderman a reason to comply, the consequence for refusal, and an appeal to the professional identity the German officer had spent an entire career building. All of it compressed into fewer than 2 pages, composed in under 20 minutes. Colonel Alderman got the message at his forward command post, east of Kronberg. He read it twice. Then he assembled his senior officers and told them what it contained. The discussion ran 3 hours, longer than General Patton had allowed him, but shorter than it might have lasted under different circumstances. These were officers who had spent years fighting in the Wehrmacht, men who had watched the army they served twisted into the instrument of a regime that obliterated everything they believed they were defending. Men who had arrived at this moment in a German city, spring of 1945, with nothing left to protect except the professional identity that Patton's message had directly addressed. They were not unanimous, but they were a majority. Alderman sent his response. It stated he was prepared to discuss terms. The language was stiff military formality, the kind German officers employed when they needed procedure as cover. But the meaning was unmistakable. He would comply. The maps reached 3rd Army headquarters the next morning. Detailed, accurate, comprehensive in a way Patton's engineers said they had not anticipated. Every mine position in Kronberg marked. Every wired explosive identified. The maps had been assembled with the same professional rigor that characterized the trap itself, which meant they could be trusted. And that trust translated directly into American lives preserved. Patton's engineers moved through Kronberg with those maps and cleared the city in 36 hours, not the week they had estimated. The advance pushed forward. Kronberg fell without a single American casualty from mines. That would not have been true if Alderman had chosen differently. Alderman and his men were processed as prisoners of war, exactly as Patton had promised. His cooperation was recorded in the official 3rd Army report, exactly as Patton had promised. Whether any of that helped him in post-war proceedings remains unclear in the documentation. What is documented is Patton's reaction when told Kronberg was clear and the advance could resume. He said only that it was the right outcome. That Alderman had made the right choice, that he hoped the German officer understood the choice was the honorable one, not the easy one, because those were not always the same thing. In this case, they happened to be. His staff pressed him afterward. What would he have done if Alderman had stayed silent? What happens to Kronberg if the German commander holds his ground and forces 3rd Army to fight through a mined city, street by street? Patton looked at the officer who asked. Then he answered. He would have done exactly what he threatened. He would have brought everything available against the German positions. No moderation, no restraint. Threats not backed by intention were not threats, he said. They were requests, and he had never once in his life issued a request when he meant a threat. Then his voice shifted. He said he had genuinely hoped Alderman would respond the way he did. Not because it simplified the military situation, though it did, because the alternative would have forced him to destroy the professional record of a soldier who had, by all available evidence, served with genuine honor inside a dishonorable cause. He said there were not many of those left in the German army by spring of 1945. He saw no reason to waste them. His staff agreed afterward. It was the most Patton thing he had said in a very long time. The threat had been real. The respect had been real. The outcome had emerged from both being communicated clearly to a man capable of understanding them. George Patton had known from the start that Alderman was that kind of man. He had read his service record and recognized in it the outline of someone who, under different circumstances, might have been precisely the sort of soldier Patton most respected. The war ended 6 weeks later. Patton never met Alderman in person. Two men who'd brokered one of the war's most peculiar surrenders never once occupied the same room, never shook hands, never spoke the words their messages had been circling toward. They dealt through go-betweens, radio frequencies, a civilian threading a written note across the lines. The shared grammar of professional soldiers who didn't need a handshake to seal an understanding. That was sufficient. In a war grinding toward its end, but not yet finished, men still bleeding out daily for terrain that would mean nothing inside 6 weeks, it was more than sufficient.